Now, I don't want them to gain another yard. You blitz all night. And if they cross the line of scrimmage, I'm going to take every last one of you out. You make sure they remember forever the night they played the Titans. Leave no doubt. Come on, now. Swing it left. Swing it left.
If you're gonna play the game,
You gotta act the part.
I'm your host, Ana Renfroe, joined by my co-host,
Hunter Mitchell.
Hunter is currently a senior studying sport management here at Texas A&M. Hunter is a former football player and just general sports enthusiast.
And current rec league basketball player, mind you.
Me, on the other hand.
Not so much. Not a rec league basketball player or a former football player or sports enthusiast. In fact, I have the lovely privilege of converting you.
That's definitely one way of putting it. But I'm definitely here to learn more about sports. But I'm definitely more of the creative arts type of person.
Which, in my personal opinion, sport is an art. It is a performance, but
just like wrestling.
we'll save that for another day.
But today we're going to be talking about the fan favorite film, Remember the Titans.
Specifically, this fan. This is my favorite movie of all time.
See, I wouldn't say this is my favorite film of all time, given I'm not a really big football or sports person. Getting there, but...
Yeah, that'd be kind of weird if it was your favorite movie just out of nowhere.
But I do recall watching this movie, growing up in, like middle school, so I am familiar with it.
Yeah, I also watched it in middle school, I think, for the first time, and every time I watch that movie, it's very strange that we did watch it in middle school, because I mean, there's some things that I think a middle schooler may not pick up on inside the film, but yeah.
I can say as a middle schooler, I probably didn't get everything in the film, but definitely revisiting it now, yeah. But for those of you who may not be so familiar with Remember the Titans, it was released in 2000, telling the story of a newly appointed African-American football coach and his high school team in their first season as a racially integrated unit in 1970s Virginia, according to IMDb. So Remember the Titans is based on true events, and really it tells an inspirational and motivational story to conquer racial discrimination, prejudice, and stereotypes. Of course, the players... It showcases triumph and overcoming adversity in the face of racism, and of course, who doesn't love a good story about friendship? So currently on IMDb, Remember the Titans sits at a 7.8 rating. However, Hunter, how would you rate it?
So I'm rating it simply based on its football accuracy. Now, this is not a reflection of what I truly rate the movie as a movie, but in terms of football accuracy... I feel like football is used as a vessel to display the themes in the movie. Because of this, there is some traumatization that goes down in the movie in terms of how football's actually played. I gotta give it probably close to like a 5.
See, yeah, I definitely agree with you. It's kind of just a thing with sports movies in general. Especially when you see the line based on true events, you know that they've just thrown the real story right out the window compared to sports documentaries and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very, very loosely based on what actually happened. But when it comes to the acting, I'd say it's at a solid 7 for me. Of course, this is led predominantly by Denzel Washington, but
Hey, hold on now. Forget about Ryan Gosling.
Ryan, I mean, he didn't necessarily play
Alan,
a major part in this film.
taking my boy out. Yost.
No, but it was
Yost.
it was definitely very fun to see young Ryan Gosling in this film. So
Yeah, no, I mean, Ryan Gosling's character was very much secondary character, but I mean, you gotta love the cast. I mean, they're just so good. I mean, I'm extremely biased, but Ethan Suplee, guy who plays Louis Lastic, so good. Also, complete side note, he is absolutely yoked now. He is absolutely shredded now, which is just really funny to think of. But man, I'm hopping on your thing, so I'll let you talk about the acting and everything. But sorry, I just had to get my piece in about that because, oh, God, I love Remember the Titans.
No, I totally agree with you too. I think it really showcases some really stellar acting. I understand for football, especially like a span like a whole season. Well, not even just a whole season. I mean, it showcases, albeit with time skips, like essentially a decade of multiple people's lives. Aspects when it comes to like featuring football games and training and such, it feels just like really, really rushed. But the flow is very, very solid to say the least. I mean, throughout the film, it's just incredibly watchable. It's just so easy to just sit there and get involved in the story, and feel compassion for the characters, feel sympathy, sometimes a little bit of hate and disgust. Um, but it's just a very kind of like personable film, which I think is why it's been a fan favorite for just so, so long.
Yeah, I mean, again, the sports aspect of it is kind of just like the it's the pancakes. It's just kind of like you wouldn't eat like you wouldn't raw dog a pancake. You would just you gotta put some stuff on it. You gotta put some syrup, some whipped cream, and that's everything else. But I gotta talk about the sports aspect. The first thing that I never really considered, like from watching the movie, especially like A&M. You hear about like the Junction Boys, going out somewhere, having a big training camp, blah blah blah. Um, it just kind of slipped my mind that this is a high school football team. So I have some notes pulled up. Now, mind you, I'm using this in reference to the like most up to date Virginia high school football handbook. This may be completely different in the '70s. They may have been completely embraced the mandatory training camps, but I got a lot of rules broken by the T.C. Williams Titans. First off, in the Virginia high school football handbook, out of season practice cannot be mandatory. And you remember Coach Boone in the film specifically says, like, if you are late to this bus, like, to go to this 2-week camp, you will not be playing for me next season, which is mandatory, which means that it's completely, all right, rule number one already broken. Um, Out season practice must be open to all students with a physical. Didn't see any of them turn in any physical paperwork. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, and I'll imagine that's something they did, and they followed that. I would say they followed that. I mean, Sunshine showed up like halfway through the camp, and so he got in. Um, and then out season practice cannot be considered criteria for tryouts, which I mean, they didn't really try out. I mean, they specifically said in the film that they would take anyone who was like willing and wanting to play. But I mean, they were kind of. I mean, this gets in the whole like mandatory out season practice stuff.
Yeah, and just to jump into, it's kind of the same thing with like Louis Lastik's character. He's incredibly lovable and silly, but he just kind of like shows up. Which again, I'm sure their procedures and required documents back then might have been a little bit different from what we need to have today. Probably for good reason too. But I mean, we just kind of have like characters like show up for convenience, for plot's sake.
Yeah, and then another rule. I'll go ahead. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. I'll say maybe we didn't get to know what day specifically they practiced on. Can't practice on Sundays, but it's a 2-week camp. So I don't know. Maybe they gave them Sundays off for let them take a break, whatever. I will give Coach Boone and Coach Yost the benefit of the doubt here. One thing that I never noticed was, first off, this is not like a penalty, but man, those uniforms they have are atrocious. Those are you hired someone who makes like costumes for movies to make your football uniforms. They are literally just like blankets. They almost look like ponchos. Like they're just white and red with just they look cloth. They look nothing like a football uniform. That's just funny to me. I just thought they were silly. But one thing that was an actual infraction pops up a couple times. I first noticed it like first game. They're playing Hayfield, who are the Hayfield Hawks. They're orange. TC Williams Titans, they're red. They both wore their primary color, which is a violation in the Virginia High School Football Handbook. the away team needs to has to wear white. Like they have to. Um, and in general, that's just kind of a rule of thumb in football. There's kind of gets broken sometimes where like the away team, if they have like a light color as like their secondary color, like a baby blue, like they get away with that. But like it was red and orange, which is like two really similar colors. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's like to the general public may not be a huge deal, but that is something that would absolutely never fly. There would be like they would pause the game or like something would go down. That would never happen. I mean, most of the time in high school, you have your home uniforms, you have your away uniforms, and you just stick to that. And that's I mean, it's just a reason of helping like the refs and the coaches and even the players. That is something that obviously like would not fly.
I mean, would you chalk that up to maybe like just the artistic choice?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm sure like they're not thinking, oh, like oh the way the Titans are away. It's because it's their first game, right? And so like they wanted it to be an away game. I get that, which I don't know why you couldn't just make it a home game to start. Um, but like they're the Titans. You don't want them to be. At least I assume it's a away game because I mean, if it's not, if it was hosted at home, the Hayfield Hawks had like signs like in front of their like student section and like cheerleaders, which if it's an away game that wouldn't happen. Like a high school would not bring their cheerleaders like to an away game unless it's like a big one. And they wouldn't like have like bannering like on front of the railing in front of the stadium. So I assume it's just because like it's the first Titans game, see them in red, etc., etc. But yeah, that's something that wouldn't go down.
I mean, were there any other glaring like sports issues that you saw?
Oh yes. So probably the biggest one that is kind of funny to think of from a football standpoint. I mean, it's very motivating, but it's the game where the refs are getting paid off, so that way Coach Yost can get his Hall of Fame, get his team back, and Coach Yost essentially tells them like, like if I have to go down with this ship, like you're going down with me to the refs. And then he gets his defense together, and he, in memorable fashion, gathers them up and says, "I don't want them to gain another yard. We will blitz all night," which is super motivating. And you think, yeah, blitz them. Don't gain another yard, whatever. At the end of the day, there are reasons why teams don't just blitz nonstop every single game. It's because there are play designs that are specifically formulated to work against the blitz, i.e., a screen pass. If you blitz multiple people in the box and then you throw a screen pass to a halfback, you've got all the linemen out in front leading this halfback against like maybe 3-4 people in the secondary. That's a touchdown. So, like as motivating as it may be, that would have got them cooked. That would maybe worked like one drive, but that would have gotten TC Williams absolutely smoked. Also funny, and it's even funny. It was funny before he was even really looking for football stuff, like just watching the movie. In that game, they're tackling people like after this like motivational speech, and they're just like clotheslining people. And it's just so funny because they're like grabbing dudes by the shoulders and like throwing them to the side, and like they're like throwing their arms out and smashing dudes in the helmets, making them flip, and they're like leaping over and like knocking dudes' helmets off. And it's like for a team that they're going into playing and they're like super tough and like super elite, you're not going to be clotheslining them to the ground. Like you're not like if this is really like a state playoff team. Like, I don't care where you are, you're not going to be able to just, like, grab them by the shoulder pads and treat them like your, like, local peewee football team. I don't care how motivated you get. I would have rather liked to see them, like, I sound like a football coach, but I'd rather like to see some form tackling. Maybe, like, some, helmet on the chest type stuff, wrap up, maybe a hog tackle even there, grab them by the legs. But absolutely in no universe are they clotheslining people in a game to tackle them.
I mean, artistically for me, again, the story progression, it's for the most part really smooth. I mean, noticeably, like even when the film first opens, it's opening in 1981. There's a big group of people congregating there at a funeral. Whose funeral? Don't know. So we start the film with the question of why do we care? But again, it flashes back to a decade before. So then we're introduced to the whole cast, and the whole rivalry between Boone and Yost. Not really rivalry, man. Racial prejudice, you know. So I mean, thematically, like the film just conquers some really, really big topics. And again, which I think is why I kind of struggled to like scenes that were kind of just so rushed, like especially when they were at the training camp. Um, that in itself, I thought was paced pretty smoothly. But again, it was just very, very fast paced. And of course, I feel like that's pretty reflective on how camp probably is, given I've never been to a camp. So.
I've never went to a 2-week football camp. I'll give you that. That's probably because there's Texas high school football rules against such thing.
How long typically are camps?
You don't really have camps. You like technically, if you have like a summer thing, it has to be completely voluntary, and it's usually just weightlifting. You UIL in Texas, from my experience, is very formulaic and structured, to where like no one gets a competitive advantage in terms of practice time. Camp per se would be 2-a-days, which is 2 practices a day over an extended period of time. But like you get to go home, like you don't, like you're not like we're not we don't get shuttled off to like some college somewhere, like they did like Gettysburg College. Like that's another thing. Again, like I'm not gonna dock them on that because I don't know like how it is in Virginia, but I do know that the rules in Virginia are very similar to Texas in the instance that you can't do that. Which again, this is the '70s, so like you don't know, but I assume that like even then they probably didn't want like high school football players practicing during the summer for 2 weeks away from home, mandatory, all day, and like the 3-4 practices a day thing. Oh man, that is a major rule violation.
That is a huge looming threat, to say the least.
That is a lawsuit begging to happen.
Yeah, and I think that pretty just goes pretty hand in hand with how Denzel Washington's character as Boone is portrayed as well. I mean, like to say the least, like he is strict. He's demanding, but ultimately very strict. And that's definitely displayed like throughout his coaching style. Just very, very uptight. But in contrast, I mean, historically we can understand why at the time he would probably have to be so stonewalled, especially with the circumstances that he was placed in, which we later learn in the film is just to save face for the district, simply to put like a black man in his position and to try to see him fall from power, which I think definitely is very reflective of the sentiment at the time. I mean, at the beginning of the film we see the outcry from a lot of white local residents there, and even from the players from Yost's team as well. But as we kind of go through that like shift in power from Yost to Boone, there's a lot of clashing, to say the least. There's a lot of clashing physically, emotionally, verbally. But again, like the group just kind of goes through like the 5 like big stages of what it's like to form a high performing team. And of course like it works. It's just again just kind of very rushed. I mean, like one day, they're just racists. They hate each other. They're prejudiced.
Yeah.
And then la 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 2 weeks later singing happily on the bus, which is fine. Sure. I'm sure that happens in real life.
Does it? I feel like decades of racial prejudice, and it wasn't even over 2 weeks. It was over like a practice. Like they had the famous left side strong side practice, and the next day they were all like woohoo, we all love each other, woohoo, yay, we're all friends. God, we don't see color, and like. No, that would not be how that would go down.
Yeah, and then for like them to return home too, like especially for like Gary Bertier's character, the whole situation like that his girlfriend at the time like continuously puts him in, Uh, I mean, I'm sure we can laugh on it now, but it's performative to say the least.
Yeah, and I mean, like, they do reflect the character, like Ray, who doesn't change, and like eventually Gary Bertier kicks him off the team. Um, which is character growth for Bertier, and then like also shows that not everyone's gonna change. But that was one person out of a team of 30. You know, I'm sure there would definitely have been more. Um, that would not have been open to the change at all. I mean, people, I find it very difficult to really to alleviate over a decade of racist sentiments in in like a 2 week span, like you said.
Especially to grow up in that culture too. For
Exactly.
like the white players' parents, of course, like as we see, their parents are outraged whenever they see that they're going to be playing with black players.
Hmm.
And like for the white players to like grow up mostly in that kind of culture, with the exception of like a few players who show up randomly uh, throughout our story,
Yeah.
it's very very hard to erase that kind of sentiment in frankly a matter of weeks.
Yeah.
I understand that having kind of I guess that trauma bond from just going through such like a physically intensive kind of training camp, it might change you, but to race essentially 2 decades worth of your culture growing up, like your family beliefs, whether or not it was moral, what that believed, but for them to just like kind of like whoop.
Obviously, growing up in Texas, football is life. High school football, especially in the community. So I will say, I don't have an issue with the community rallying around the football team and beginning to embrace the football team as mixed when they're winning. Like when they really start winning and they go undefeated and whatnot. That's something I could really truly see happening. Maybe not to like the extent where everyone's like woohoo, showing up to every game and whatnot. But I do think football is a way of uniting people, um, in a unique sense that like it's just like anything, like it's a cultural aspect. So like when they embrace the culture and like that the team had already like allegedly embraced in this 2 week span, it kind of permeates into the community. So I don't have an issue with the community learning to love and grow around the team over the entire season,
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Again, which is why it's just so hard to fit so much time into a matter of only hours something minutes
Hmm.
of runtime.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, really, like I think the writing and overall acting for the movie is just pretty well done to say the least. I mean, of course, we saw some bigger name stars like Denzel Washington in this. Of course, some maybe more baby stars at the time like Ryan Gosling. um, but I mean, overall, it's just like a very enjoyable film to say the least. With like historical and maybe like football inaccuracies aside, it's just very easy to like hit play, sit back and watch. But overall, it's kind of like a feel good story by the end of it. To come out a better person, to be changed.
Yeah, I agree.
But I mean, other than that, do you have any closing thoughts?
I mean, other than the fact that the high school I went to was the Titans, so I also relate in that way about the Titans being
Were you remembered though?
I was really upset at the fact that we never used that kind of slogan. Yeah, especially when it's your favorite movie, but, live live and move on, I guess.
I guess. Well, thank you so much for sitting down with me for this episode, Hunter. Just remember, if you're gonna play the game, you gotta act the part. I'm your host, Ana Renfroe,
I'm Hunter Mitchell.
and we'll see you next week.